DeepSeek announcement of two detailed technical topics called distillation and reinforcement learning.
Apple working on robotic capabilities and inputting AI-generated models into robots that can be used in the home.
GitHub announcing agent capabilities for their Copilot software.
Lyft has announced that they have implemented AI-powered customer service and improved customer service resolution times by 87%.
Notebook LM Plus is coming into Google's AI Premium $20 a month package. YouTube out with a couple announcements. They're going to be rolling out auto dubbing. They're also putting out an AI-based age verification. So Google is bringing their VO2 video model. Google's DeepMind released Alpha Geometry 2. Paris AI Summit
Brought together global leaders and tech giants to have a debate about overseeing and regulating AI.
Elon wants OpenAI's nonprofit group for $97.4 billion, making an offer to buy the OpenAI nonprofit out.
OpenAI has released a new model spec for AI guidelines.
Welcome back to What the AI, where we decode the latest advancements in the world of artificial intelligence. I'm Jeff Keltner.
And I'm Annie Delgado.
Hey, Annie, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm good. We're a day early this week, so all the AI companies dumped all their news a day early just to make my life harder yesterday when we tried to do the rundown. But that's life.
That's life. It is a gloomy and rainy day in the Bay Area. How about in Southern California?
Expecting 3 inches of rain today here in Southern California. So also gloomy, rainy. Just wish we'd gotten this rain about a month ago. It would have been much more advantageous for the SoCal area if we could have gotten this a little bit earlier.
100%. Well, big weekend last weekend. Did you watch the Super Bowl?
I did not watch the Super Bowl. Did you watch the Super Bowl? I watched a few of the ads, but I didn't watch the Super Bowl.
Oh, I watched it beginning to end. I was there for it. It was a great game, but lots of AI ads in the Super Bowl this year.
There were a lot. Did you have a favorite, or what were your favorite AI ads? I did watch the ads. I'll say I tuned in for the ads, if not the whole game.
Okay, fair enough. Let's see. My favorite AI ad was probably, honestly, the Woody Harrelson, Matthew McConaughey ads, just in terms of like, they were funny. The Agent Force, yeah, like they were funny. The OpenAI ad, I didn't actually know what it was an ad for until the very end when it was like ChatGPT, but I was kind of like watching it being like, is this going to be a pharmaceutical ad? Like, where are we going with this? So I was engaged because I was trying to decipher, but I did not expect it to be ChatGPT till the very end when they...
Total stake in the ground that they are totally a consumer brand now. Like that was just a total love me, I'm the future consumer brand. No tech, no research, no anything, just like a visual aesthetic and a we are the future kind of message. So I thought it was pretty funny that it was just like the total transformation to an absolute consumer app brand.
That is 100%. If there was anybody who's still with a question in their mind, I think it was answered by the price tag of the Super Bowl ad.
Yes. And then I enjoyed the Meta Ray-Bans ad. I thought they were funny with various actors knocking things over. And I actually have my Meta Ray-Bans, so I use those. That's one product that I also actually use on a regular basis that I...
You mentioned a few weeks ago that you had ordered them, but we haven't gotten a product review yet. So maybe that's going to be an upcoming...
We'll have to do that. I'll bring them to an upcoming episode and we'll do a full review of them.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see, who else wasn't... Google was not left out. They had an ad. Perplexity had an ad. So basically all the big guns showed up for the Super Bowl.
The Google one was amusing to me, I guess, because they originally had something about the percentage of cheese that's Gouda, and the fact was wrong, or at least somewhat in dispute. So they manually edited, at least I think they were showing different ads in different parts of the country, highlighting different local products. And Perplexity actually no ad, but they gave away $1 million based on questions asked at the time of the Super Bowl. I don't really understand the details, but like putting their stake in the ground as a consumer brand as well. But $1 million is a lot cheaper than a Super Bowl ad. So they tried to game the system. For
sure. Well, I would say as much shade as we throw at Google, I have to throw a little bit more. I thought theirs was probably the lowest ranking of the AI ads. Yeah, I don't know if you felt that way too, but
I feel that way about so many things related to Google now, and I feel bad to say it, but it did not impress. Did not impress.
Did not.
Well, we're going to try a slightly new format today. So if you got feedback on this, let us know. But we kind of broken our stories down into 3 sections. They've got at least interim names. Starting with the more technical stuff, we're going to call the AI radar, a few of the real world use cases, AI in the wild, and then we're going to get to the fun ethics, regulations, policy, and in a section we're calling AI alignment. So we're going to try and structure these things a little bit more than just run through the news so you have an idea of what's coming. So I guess we'll start off with the technical announcements and new releases for the week in AI radar.
Well, I have to say your naming convention is product marketing better than GPT-4o, Flashlight,
To be
et
fair,
cetera.
GPT-4o helped me with it. So I thought,
Oh,
maybe they just need to ask ChatGPT what it wants to be named, and it will do a better job than naming it after the model names. But it
maybe.
helped me brainstorm a few names for the sections, so we came up with those.
I love it. Okay, so AI radar, Jeff, what you got?
Well, I'm going to start off with another kind of first time thing we're doing, but a lot of the news the last week or two, starting probably with the DeepSeek announcement of V3 and R1. V3 is a little older, but I think most people didn't notice it until R1. And then also like researchers at Berkeley and Stanford announcing like $50 models and $30 models. And a lot of these things have centered around two kind of detailed technical topics called distillation and reinforcement learning. And so I thought maybe we would just take a step back and talk about what those things are today. Like, what is distillation and what is reinforcement learning, and actually dive into those a little bit.
I love it. So, start us off. What does it mean to say a model is distilled?
Well, it's just like an alcohol. No, I'm not going to use an alcohol distillation analogy. A distilled model is really when you are using one kind of what they call a teacher model to train more efficient, smaller, what they call a student model. And this kind of has always made sense to me that it would happen. If you think about how much data goes into training the cutting edge models, like everything ever written on the internet, I mean, a lot of that's not useful stuff. And so maybe it needs to learn some of it, but essentially you're using smarter models, often not models developed by the open source team like a DeepSeek that is building a V3, but maybe a GPT-4o, a GPT-01. And you're actually using it to construct the training data set for a smaller, more efficient model. Usually the digital models are not quite as capable as the teaching model, but they're often much smaller in size and therefore less expensive to train and less expensive to run in real time. And so really the process of taking all the knowledge that got accumulated in this massive model run and distilling it down to a smaller, more efficient model that you can then, execute more easily or open source if you're deep sea.
Awesome. So it's literally just like taking all of this vast information and boiling it down to its most important points, or these are still pretty sophisticated models, but much more to the sort
Yeah,
of ground truth of the most important points.
I think that's right. And what's interesting is it's so intuitive. Like if you had somebody who spent years studying to become a PhD in economics and you wanted to become like to a college level economics person, you wouldn't have to spend the years. You would just go, tell me what I need to know to understand these concepts. That's kind of what these models do is they use the smart model that was trained on all this stuff to boil down to what do I really need to know to learn what is going to be important for me. And particularly if you think about fields like mathematics or science, where there's a very clear corpus of knowledge to understand, you can see how they can compress that down from everything that was ever written to the sets of stuff you need to have in the training data set to actually learn the things you want to learn. So that's kind of the process for distillation.
Well, last week you told me you wanted to debate more. So, devil's advocate, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. Why don't I want to be a PhD level and everything? What's the advantage of having the distilled college level as opposed to the PhD level?
Well, I think that it's a really interesting question. It's a good debate. I think and the interesting thing is you need the PhD level to make the college level, right? So you kind of can't short circuit that in some ways. But ultimately, it's going to be a question of, I think what will happen is there'll be use cases where you can't afford to pay for the runtime of either training or the inference time. I mean, DeepSeek is two orders of magnitude less expensive than some of the most capable GPT models. And there are use cases where I'm doing hard science where that's totally worth paying. And there's use cases, maybe take customer service, where it's not, where a smaller model that's not quite as smart, but is much cheaper to run is just a better option for that. And I think it will expand the number of applications and places where we can put AI and have it be economical to be used. So I think it's actually going to open up more use cases because you'll say, well, for this, we just need a smaller distilled model that can do most of the stuff. If I'm really doing research, and I love ChatGPT's deep research function. Like I want the best model for that, but that's not where I do most of my queries, right? Most of my queries are going somewhere else where I can use a much smaller, simpler model.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it also sort of is interesting to think about sort of in the future. We've talked about for artificial general intelligence, do you need a supermodel that's an absolute PhD level expert on everything, or do you need certain models with like a deep expertise in a certain area? And so we might start to see some divergence where the super intelligent models are more specialized versus more generalized models that have broader use cases can have more distilled concepts. So that's interesting. Now, reinforcement learning, that's is this like what does this refer to? I think always of my dog and how I try to reinforce him with treats if he's being a bad dog. But
Exactly that. That's exactly how it
okay.
works. That's reinforcement learning in a nutshell, training your dog with treats. Reinforcement learning is the concept of kind of, you can think of it most easily kind of in AI models that are being built to play games where you don't really tell it what you want it to do, You don't feed it videos of like, here's the best player in the world playing this game. Try and do what the human did in some training example. You go, I want you to win the game. Here's the metric by which you do it. It's score. This is how AlphaGo was trained. This is when a board is winning or losing. And then you just let it play a whole bunch, and it chooses the paths that are most likely to lead it to the reward that you've given it, which it comes from winning. And so these are really kind of semi-supervised or unsupervised versions where you're not telling it exactly what the right answer is. You're telling it, I want you to get to this point. How you do it is up to you. And so we've seen this. The reason this has come up recently is a lot of the deep thinking models, right? The reasoning models are being trained after the kind of first run of getting kind of a 4.0 type model to turn that into an O1. They're using reinforcement learning on things like math problems. Are you able to get to the right answer? Well, we know what the right answer is. So when you reason yourself to the right answer, you get this. And so then it starts to learn how to go through chain of thought reasoning. One of the most interesting things in the DeepSeek R1 announcement was that they didn't actually tell it to do chain of thought process. It just determined that that was the most effective way to reach the reward it was seeking, which was getting the right answer on these kind of very clear problems in math or coding or science, where you can really have it have a reinforcement, have a reward when it reaches the thing. So that's the idea here is we're setting up a goal and rewarding the model for when it reaches the goal without kind of giving it specific instructions for how to get there. The way you think of training data being, oh, this was the right answer. They go, oh, I don't really care of the steps that you're producing. I care about do the steps ultimately lead to the thing for which I'm rewarding you. And that's where the reinforcement or reward concept comes from.
That's super interesting to think about that in the context of like the LLM thing. You're basically training the LLM to care about the carrot that they care about is the accuracy at the end of the day, which is hopefully what all of us are trying to aim for. But that's a really interesting sort of path to get there.
When it also shows you that one of the interesting elements of that is it works better in context where there's a clear right or wrong answer. Like, why is it so good at math and science and coding? Well, I can give you a bunch of math tests and I know the answer. And so then I can reward you for getting the right answer. If it's creative writing, well, it's not so clear that I can tell you this was a better output, that was a better output. How do I reinforce that? So it also points to maybe where the strengths of these things, and they look so smart because they're being evaluated on a kind of information and task where there's a very clear right and wrong. And I think it's a lot harder to use this kind of training on things where there is no clear right or wrong. Right? You don't know for sure if this was the right result. And so it's very hard to build the reinforcement, the reward function for like, is that a better piece of art you generated or a worse piece of art? That's a pretty subjective judgment. And so it's harder to use this kind of training for those categories of knowledge or process.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, I liked that deep dive. I learned something that's helpful for me.
There we go. Well, let's move on to some of the news of the week. We'll start off with GitHub announcing agent capabilities for their Copilot software. Agent mode, I think they'd call it for autonomous coding.
I think this is the most exciting update of the week.
This is the most exciting.
Oh yeah, I am so excited about this.
Do you use VS Code a lot and write a lot of code? Why is this exciting for you? I'm curious.
Well, I'll let you get through the headline first before I tell you why I'm so excited.
All right. So GitHub announced agent mode, which is essentially going to take Copilot. So for a little bit of background, Copilot is an LLM. You can use actually different LLMs underneath it, but it integrates into your coding environment and typically is used either as a chat, like a partner to chat, or kind of autocomplete, where I can start typing some code and it'll finish it. Or I can say, I'd like you to write a piece of code that does X, and it'll insert. Most developers use it for maybe 10 or 15 lines. I want you to write a loop that does this or write a function that does this. And so that's available today. It's integrates into a lot of the development environments, the text editors that developers use. But now they're talking about Copilot that can look across multiple files and take something more like a buck or build me a test for this. I want, when you give this function this, and it can actually write to multiple files, read from multiple files, understand the context of your code base. So I'm going to start rolling out this kind of agent mode that can autonomously kind of work on broader level tasks and help me edit this file that I'm in right now and write a little bit of code that does A or B or C.
Yeah, so cool. I'm excited because similar to some of the dynamic that we've talked about, like in medicine and in previous weeks, where how much time is spent on diagnosis versus treatment. In software development, the same phenomenon happens, right? Where like you push out a piece of software and it doesn't work exactly as you had thought it was going to work. And then you have to spend hours trying to debug it and figure out where the error went. And I mean, that would just be such a time saver to have an agent that can find that for you so you can go on to your next creative task. And again, unlocking the human potential and human sort of powered thinking to be on more creative tasks and not on debugging, this error or that error. So I think this is pretty cool.
I think it's very cool. And the other thing I think about for repetitive tasks in coding, and I'm sure you see this a lot when you do code reviews or talk to the developers, is like the percentage of code that has tests that test if it's still working the way it's supposed to. We call test coverage. And nobody wants to write them because you finish writing the code, it kind of does what you want, and you're like, let's get it out there. Do I want to spend an extra 15% of my time writing? Nobody wants to do it. And if you could say, hey, I've written the code, here's the specs, like go write me a bunch of tests to ensure that it's working. And of course, for the audience that's not as familiar, these tests are important because as I edit the code, I want to make sure that I'm not breaking the way the old code works. And so as code's edited, these tests help to make sure you don't introduce bugs in the system at a later date. But nobody wants to write the test. You end up with a lot of code that's untested. And that's where a lot of bugs come from that get introduced in software. So it would be great to see higher test coverage.
Well, now you just again made my case about why it's exciting because you know who likes it when people write tests is risk officers. But the
No.
actual engineers are like, this is not the most fun part of my job. I really liked building the cool thing. But then when this crazy lady came behind and told me I had to do all these tests, that was less fun. So I'm excited for this.
More bug fixes, more test coverage. And
Yeah.
I actually think for startups, the ability to maybe, I think these things will start to look like mid-level, junior level developers where you can start to say, hey, to build our prototype, to build V1 of the app, how many people do we need to hire? That number is probably going down for startups. So really interesting time for people to be able to leverage their ideas into products much more rapidly with a lot less people investment, I expect as well. Very exciting times.
Very exciting times.
All right, we'll keep it moving with updates from Google. I've wrapped these all together because they just had to like drop a bunch of little stuff that everybody should know about. First up, Notebook LM Plus. Everybody knows we've talked about Notebook LM, a tool you can create a podcast just like this one. Not quite like this one. This one's better, but you can create a podcast out of your own content. The Plus feature that has some like higher usage limits, interactive capabilities is coming into Google's AI Premium $20 a month package. So for AI Premium users, you're getting another set of benefits in Notebook LM for that. YouTube out with a couple announcements. They're going to be rolling out auto dubbing to all of their partner program creators, the folks who essentially are monetizing their content, which will allow them to dub their content into multiple languages basically seamlessly, which is kind of cool. You'll be able to watch, and I will see if they get to the point where they can make the video look good so it doesn't look like it's dubbed. I can adjust the models.
Yeah.
They're also this. Maybe we should talk about this in the policy section. Annie, putting out an AI-based age verification, or it basically is going to attempt to determine your age based on your interactions with the system, which I thought was really fascinating.
I thought that was really fascinating and also really awesome. So I think that was a great, that's a great use case for a AI capability. Yeah. There's a lot of content on YouTube you don't want your 12-year-old seeing.
That's correct. The last two updates, Google is bringing their VO2 video model, which is considered one of the best video models, into some of the YouTube shorts. So their experimental dream screen feature. So kind of making it easier for creators to use AI tools in the video creation process as a part of their YouTube shorts. So I expect to see even more, obviously, AI generated videos in my YouTube shorts. So YouTube is like there's so much good content on it, I can't get rid of it. So it's my social media weakness. My vice of choice in social media world is definitely YouTube, and shorts are the most addicting. So we'll see how that plays out.
I think that just gives away your generation a little bit. Or maybe not, actually. My kids are on YouTube a lot.
My kids are
So,
on YouTube too, so I feel
yeah.
like one with the youngs. And then the last announcement, maybe the most interesting, Google's DeepMind released Alpha Geometry 2, which has elevated the capacity for AI to solve math Olympiad problems. I don't even, I know there's a math Olympiad, but the whole idea of a math Olympiad is crazy for me. They've got now an 84% success rate versus a previous benchmark of 84, which makes them better than most gold medal participants, which I had to look this up. Like in 2022, there were 44 gold medalists out of 589 people. Remember, those are 589 people who were selected to take the International Math Olympiads. They're not a random assortment of 589 people. And that's how good at high level math problems this new Alpha Geometry 2 is. That's just kind of crazy to me.
That is pretty crazy. Well, so as you mentioned, lots out from Google this week. What are you most excited about, or what kind of piqued your interest the most of these four?
I think the Alpha Geometry was the most interesting. I mean, everything else is a kind of interesting feature. I think it's the kind of thing we should expect the drumbeat of. We're going to auto dub videos. We're going to add the stuff into our tools. But Alpha Geometry was interesting really for two reasons to me. One, they added on top of an LLM a symbolic reasoning model that allowed them to kind of, so to me, the idea that they took a different structure to be a little more domain specific to geometry, leveraging some basic LLM concepts, is a really interesting thing when you think about use cases in healthcare, when you think about use cases in education, when you think about use cases in real world material sciences or biology. That gets to be really interesting, this idea of a different kind of model that is a hybrid of a pure LLM and some more symbolic domain specific version. I thought that was a really exciting thing. And the level of capability there is kind of unbelievable.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. What about we've said it before, but I think Notebook LM is like one of the best just like useful tools out there. So I'm pretty excited to see this more widely available for folks.
Yeah, it's a very cool tool, and I certainly it's probably the only Google AI tool, sorry, Google, that I use with any regularity right now is Notebook LM, and it's really good if you've got a big document, whether you want the audio, which is kind of what it's best known for, the podcast, or what they call audio overviews, or whether you just, like, wanna have a conversation about it. It's really great, and, when I'm preparing for this podcast, I often get links to articles and papers on archive, and I usually cannot make heads or tails of the bulk of the content in said papers on archives, academic kind of paper posting spot. So I usually throw them in a Notebook LM and have explained to me what's in there. And it's very helpful for people to take a 30 or 40 page academic type paper that is not in my style and understand the core concepts that are in there. So it's certainly one of my favorite. That may be the one I use the most out of these announcements.
Yeah, I think that's right for me too. And I think anybody who has not tried Notebook LM, you should try it out because when you have dense material, but you really want to understand it, it's a great way to interact with it in a totally different way. And I think it's a cool functional and practical use case for AI.
Absolutely. One of my I was having a this may be a little piece of knowledge here, but I had a conversation with a bunch of people managers. They asked me how to use AI. And when I think about for people who say, hey, I know ChatGPT is great, but I don't know what to use it for, I kind of think of it in 3 or 4 core use cases. One is just Wikipedia on steroids. Like if there's a concept you want to know, something you would have looked up in the encyclopedia, you go to these tools. If you're writing something and you need it edited, you go to one of these tools. And if you have a big thing of data, like a document or whatever else, I go to one of these tools, whether it's a document or a data file and you want to do visualizations or ask questions about the data. And then my fourth use case is probably just when I need a thought partner, when I need somebody to bounce an idea off and go, play the role of somebody I'm negotiating with, or play the role of an employee I have to have a difficult conversation with, or play the role of my 15-year-old son that I need to have a difficult conversation with. And how can I think about introducing or talking about or whatever? Those are my four kind of core use cases for these. And certainly one of the core is I've got this big document or set of documents or Excel file somebody dumped on me and I want to understand it better. Please help me. That's definitely one of my four core use cases for AI these days.
That's cool. I like that. I really like that parenting hack there too.
Yeah, I actually took a bunch of parenting advice that I've liked and dumped it into a chat GPT project. So it knows also some like little Lisa D'Amour stuff and whatever. So it's one of my, I do use that
That's
one.
cool.
Don't tell my kids, they
Nice.
might, I hope they don't listen to this.
That is AI generated.
Yes. So last question of the week in our AI radar is Elon Musk going to buy, 44 billion for Twitter? Not a good enough deal. Elon wants OpenAI's nonprofit group for $97.4 billion, making an offer to buy the OpenAI nonprofit out. Did you see that news?
I saw it. That's mind boggling. What's the strategy here?
It was funny because Sam Altman came back immediately with a OpenAI is not for sale. And then did you see his comment? He said, but we're happy to buy Twitter for 9.74 billion. Nice little
It's
75% discount to Elon's price.
a little spicy, a little spiciness coming out of Sam.
There's some tension here between these two. I think this was really a little bit of Elon clearly not happy with the direction OpenAI has gone in terms of being more closed versus open. And I think the real play here is less that Elon will buy or wants to buy OpenAI, although I'm sure if they actually took the offer, he would find the $97 billion and complete the acquisition happily. But I think really as they're trying to spin the for-profit entity out of the nonprofit and separate those two, one of the challenges is valuing what the nonprofit is worth and therefore what the for-profit needs to put forward into that nonprofit. And I think Elon here is trying to make it very expensive for Sam to do this by putting a market value on what the nonprofit's rights are, that it will be hard for the OpenAI board to undervalue versus as they try and spin this out. So I think he's just trying to make the process of separating the nonprofit and the for-profit more expensive and more difficult for Sam for whatever reasons, animus historical. But that's, I think, ultimately less is he trying to buy the OpenAI nonprofit and more he's just trying to like force it to be harder for them to get that separation done.
Yeah. So if you predict the future here, how do you think that this is going to play out? Do you think that this is just like posturing that won't really have any real world impacts, or how do you think the story will end?
No, I think it'll have real world impacts. I think it will end with exactly what we expect, which is OpenAI is going to split. But OpenAI is going to have to put money into the nonprofit to fund it at its value. And my guess is that just got a lot more expensive because I think be very hard for the board to argue that that's not a legitimate offer and that the fair market value of that nonprofit is less than what was offered for it on the open market. And so I think it'll just end up costing a bunch of people a bunch of money. But I think they'll still make that split because there's no way they can continue to raise the billions of dollars they need to do training without having a for-profit entity in which the people investing the billions can recoup their investment. And so I think they will just suffer through, and it will increase the animus between Sam and Elon because he will have cost a bunch of money to OpenAI.
Yeah. Well, we talked a few weeks ago about the lawsuit between Sam and Elon, and the story continues.
Yeah,
It
it
keeps
does. It
getting juicier.
keeps being spicy. I like spicy. It keeps things fun.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Jeff, let's pivot to our AI in the wild segment. Apple has been hard at work working on robotic capabilities and inputting AI generated models into robots that can be used in the home. We talked before about humanoid robots that can do your laundry. This does not seem to be the direction that Apple's going in. The one where looks like we might get sometime this year is a tool called Elegant, which is basically a lamp. It's a robotic lamp, and it kind of looks like the Pixar lamp, that
Yeah, it jumps
comes
around
in, that
depending on the
jumps around, and yeah, it's emotive, and so it's actually kind of cute, and it's kind of a cute idea. But basically, Apple's really leaning into the investment in a smart home, and this lamp is sort of one tool where it can have an interface. You can FaceTime with it. The lamp has a swivel capability where it can like lean and respond. It's powered by Siri, so if you ask it a question, it can nod at you saying yes or no. If it is going to respond to you about the weather, it's going to look outside first, and so it gives some of those more human feelings relative to, when you just ask your phone or you just ask your Amazon Echo. It feels more like you're interacting with something that has emotions, even though it's still at the end of the day just a lamp.
It's so different than like the humanoid robot that feels emotionless that you see coming out of some of the places, and now you're talking about a very non-humanoid like Pixar lamp, but that is expressive and emotive and feels, I won't say more human, but more, you know, human, I don't know what the right word is, but it feels more like a real entity you're interacting with, some sort of a personality. It's really interesting.
It's really interesting, to sort of think about because this is why people love Apple, right? Like, Apple is great at putting out consumer products, and maybe this is something that actually will totally take off, and people will want to have that emotional sort of human element that probably none of us were thinking about, like, "Oh, I really wish that my Echo would nod at me," but we don't know. Maybe when we get this lamp, we'll actually really like that feature about it, and I think that Apple does a really good job of making products that people just love, right? So we'll see if people love the lamp.
We'll see. I have my skepticism between the killed electric car project that Apple is rumored to be working on, the Apple Vision Pro, which is not sold, is not a product that Apple made that consumers seem to love, and the rumors that they've killed their AR, XR glasses. It's really interesting to see if they can find what the next category is, but beyond iPhone, and really, I think everything after iPhone, kind of iPhone accessory, whether it's AirPods or Apple Watch, they're kind of like iPhone plus things that go with that ecosystem, and can they develop a new ecosystem will be a really interesting question. I would love the robot, particularly if it starts folding laundry. That seems to be the number one use case in our house for a home robot is folding laundry. So,
Yeah.
Apple, get that guy folding laundry, and we'll have a conversation.
Yeah, nodding at me while it folds my laundry. I'm there for that. But I think to your point about Apple, they've had some fails, but like that's because they're taking big swings, right? And they can afford to throw out 10 ideas and only have one be a success and actually iterate on those 10 ideas. And we've talked about the value of that in towards terms of the creative process when we've talked about different gadgets that have come out and like, are all the gadgets going to be life changing and amazing? Probably not, but a few will be really cool. And I think I just love how Apple's like they keep trying different things. So we'll see if the lamp is the one that takes off.
I'm looking forward to hear more about the lamp when we see more details about what it may be.
Yeah. Well, we've talked before, you're not a social media guy. Are you a smart home guy? Like, are you the target market for this type of lamp?
I'm a disgruntled smart. I mean, I feel like the smart home environment is so broken in terms of, will this work with that? And now we've upgraded to Matter, and I've got the first smart home switch we installed. This is a very bizarre story, but I'll tell it to you anyway, because we installed lights in our backyard and we found a junction box and we could plug it into it. And I found a light switch that controls the junction box, and it's underneath the second floor master bedroom sink, like cabinet under the sink on the wall under like and is the switch for this light. And I went, well, I wouldn't be able to turn these lights on or off, and I don't really want to go to the bathroom. So we bought a smart switch just to do that. And that
Mm.
was years ago. And last week it stopped responding to commands. Like it'll still upgrade if you push in, but now I need to go buy another one. So I'm in the market. I have done any number of smart home things, but I'm also pretty dissatisfied with the state of smart home. Like it's not very smart. It's very hard to make things work together. It's very hard to find an interface that can do it all. You end up with like 8 apps, and
Yeah.
it's kind of frustrating experience. It's one that could really use an Apple Touch if they could get it right.
Well, I think that that is the exact problem that Apple's trying to go after, right? With their iPhone, they said, "Hey, you don't need your camera and your iPad and your, desktop that has email. We can just put it all in one device." And I think that we're starting to see them lean into the smart home features so that you do have one integrated sort of one-stop shop for all this. So we'll see if they can succeed in that. We don't know yet. Let's move on and talk about Lyft. So from smart homes to transportation, quite a quite a transition there. So Lyft has actually announced that they have implemented AI-powered customer service into their sort of core tool set, and in doing so, have improved customer service resolution times by 87%. So those are game-changing numbers.
It's a
Very
big number.
interesting to see. Yeah, they're transforming their customer service, as I said. They're using Claude as their sort of primary LLM that they're implementing here, and what they're seeing is accurate responses, faster responses, happier customers, and I think we'll see a lot of companies start to move in this direction in the future as well.
It seems like the obvious first case. I think these guys, Lyft was using it for drivers initially,
Mhm.
and now I think they're rolling it out to their customer base as well, like the consumers for at least some. And it just feels like this may be. And I know you manage a lot of the customer support at Upstart, but like this feels like it could be one of the first places where we have AI that's really capable of doing at least some portion of the work that people are doing today. Where we see real job displacements potentially if people go, hey, we just don't need to hire as many people in the call center to handle basic customer interactions when we can use Claude or some sort of LLM-based chat assistant.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see because I think operationally, a lot of companies have tried to solve the like what I'll call the low hanging fruit customer service inquiries through non human methods. And those methods have generally just been really bad, right? Like you interact with some sort of chat bot, but the chat bot is wrong a lot of the time. And then by the time you get transferred to an agent, you're pissed off, excuse my French, but you're just like frustrated because you got all of this misinformation and it took you a long time to get there. And so I think one of the things that we'll see here is that these types of systems can be much faster at resolving the low-hanging fruit questions. And so when you do have a more challenging inquiry that has to get to a customer service agent, you're probably going to have a better experience because you're not going to be angry when you get there. The customer service agent isn't talking to a bunch of angry people either. So we might see job displacement, that's true, but we might also just see a fundamental shifting of, like, how people think about when they have to talk on the phone to somebody and maybe they'll be more willing to pick up the phone, so, I mean, it's gonna be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, it certainly feels like the first real, like if you think of LLMs now as being pretty capable of augmenting coding work, and maybe some mathematical work, like that's like the real use case if you look at what's going on, that is really in the world. This feels like the first non-technical use case that is going to turn into a thing one way or the other. This is going to be a big deal.
Yeah, I think so, and, it would be so, interesting for me to nerd out on their sort of specific use cases and the 87% that was actually automated. Because I think a big challenge with a lot of the way this stuff plays out today is in people feeling like they're getting a personalized experience, like, they're like, "I get your thing about your company's policy, and I could have read that on your website, but what I wanna actually know is, with my specific experience, would you be willing to make an exception for this thing?" And they wanna feel more of that sort of empathetic touch that a cold chatbot interface usually can't provide, but maybe an LLM type of solution could provide. So I would really love to interact with it. I'm not a Lyft user. I usually always use Uber, but maybe I'll try it so I can take
See if
their
it feels.
customer service for a spin.
Yeah, you just got to be careful if you're running these teams that it doesn't hallucinate some sort of a agreement to your exception that that's happened before for some of these chatbots that have hallucinated. Oh yeah, we can do that for free or discount, or and that's not always great.
For the consumer, that'd be great because as long as the company upholds it, but for the company, not so good.
Not so good. Well, I'm going to shoot this to our final segment that we've called AI alignment, kind of a broad bucket for regulation, ethics, safety, and whatever else goes in
Save
there.
the best for last.
I think that this is especially this week, Annie, because there's a lot in here this week. But let's just start off. I want to ask you about the Paris AI Summit. Like, they decided Paris, what a great city. We're going to hold an AI summit here. What happened? Like what were your takeaways watching the AI Action Summit in Paris this week?
Paris is a great city, and yes, so the summit was held earlier this week, February 10th and 11th, and basically what it did was it brought together global leaders and tech giants, sort of to the same table, to have a debate about how we think about overseeing and regulating AI. You saw very divergent approaches from different countries, and we've seen that in the previous years playing out. And we've talked about before the relative conservatism of the EU versus lack of conservatism in other places. And so it was really interesting to sort of bring all these people to the table. I mentioned last week, like we just got to get people bringing them to the table and come with your different points of view and have the debate. Well, that's what they did here. So this is super exciting to see happen.
So what were the notable things? I know US Vice President JD Vance showed up to give a keynote talk. What were the highlights for you? That was one of mine.
JD Vance was there. It was his first trip abroad since the inauguration. So this was our first chance to sort of see him and what he has to say. He led with a very America first sort of message, like we're going to be the leader of innovation and we're going to be the leader in not regulating, which was an interesting sort of thing to put out there. And his sort of message was like, the United States is very creative. We can use AI to generate jobs. We can do so responsibly without going to a state of, censorship or just really overdoing it that we're seeing in other parts of the world. And that's what we're leading with. And so on the one side, that would be beautiful if we could figure out a way to get that right. I think in the reality, back on the home front, there's some real risks to that also. So, like in the United States, one of the challenges that we have is in the absence of federal regulation, we get a patchwork regulation from different states who have differing points of view, right? So, if we're not going to get some more federal sort of oversight or guidance, at least about what they want to see AI systems do, we risk this situation where Colorado has a rule and California has a rule and Texas has no rule and this, like all of these different sort of frameworks. And I think that that could almost risk gumming us up more than a federal type of system. So that's the risk. JD Vance, if you're listening, which I doubt he is, that's the one sort of flaw in the argument I think that he put out there.
And then I also found it interesting that the French president Emmanuel Macron seemed a little less regulation, leaning towards highly regulating the space than I expected. Maybe because the French actually have a dog in this fight with Mistral and Le Chat, I believe, whatever your
Le
name,
chat.
Le Chat. But it feels like when you have big AI companies doing well, maybe you feel like more like you want to stay out of the way, and when you don't, maybe you feel like you want to come and put the shackles on all of the companies that you're worried about doing things in your country. But it was interesting to see him take what I don't think of as a typical French approach, pretty heavy proactive regulation.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you hit the nail on the head. They have a horse in the race now. And so and this is the thing of like this is the risk of over-regulating frankly any type of new technology when you don't really understand it, right? And we saw that play out a little bit in the United States as well, and we've definitely seen it play out in Europe of like people who don't really understand the technology and all of the risks and benefits of it, trying to write rules over index on things that you're like, that's not actually really even a risk yet, right? Like, we don't really need to be worried about that. But the people who are developing the technology and actually are very deep in the weeds on the different risks and are debating them within their company and, wrestling with different things, they actually have like a pretty valid point of view. And I think it's easy to get jaded and say, well, these companies are also, for profit. And so there's risk there. But they also, we talked about at the beginning, ChatGPT, a consumer brand, they have a obligation to not do anything super crazy that's going to alienate their user base. So they actually are engaging in a lot of the right debates and are pretty important people to have at the table in developing these sort of policies. And anyway, so I was glad to see, France is like, we're in the race. We agree. We're learning about this. We're going to create jobs. We're going to be AI leaders too. So we'll see if Le Chat takes off.
The other thing that occurs to me when we talk about the risk to regulation, really, as you watched DeepSeek take off, and you realize that there are parts of the world that are not going to follow an EU regulatory regime. And with DeepSeek being open sourced and being so much smaller than the models as they were trying to be regulated, yet nearly as capable, you just realize that there's some sense in which the cat is out of the bag. And the only thing you really do as a Western world when you restrict your ability to pursue the objective of creating the best versions of these models is to put yourself behind other places in the world that are not going to do the same kind of restrictions and are not going to have the same kind of qualms. And that doesn't feel like it ends us up in a better place as the world for us to have a Europe and an America that are hamstringing their efforts while China runs full speed ahead. That just doesn't feel like it's going to be a winning strategy.
I could not agree more. Definitely think that's a real risk for both for Europe and the United States if we don't figure out how to mitigate that. Let's move on to OpenAI. So OpenAI has released a new model spec. It's an update to their previous model spec. It was about a 6.7x in size model spec, so a much larger set of information. And it's basically kind of ushers in a new era for AI guidelines. And so I talked about a second ago how these big companies are having a lot of the debates about the safety protocols around their models and how we should be interacting with them. This is a sort of a big statement from OpenAI to come out and say, here is the result of those debates that we've had internally, and here is our current thinking on the hard problems. So that was an interesting thing to see them publish. They made it public, and they basically essentially said, if this is useful to other people that want to sort of copy some of the compliance measures, the safety protocols, et cetera, if they want to edit it, if they want to like give us feedback and advice, and again like bring people to the table in terms of having a conversation, here's our cards on the table. Let us know what you think. So I thought that was a very interesting approach for them to take. And they also had, news they're getting ready to release their new GPT 4.5 and 5 models. So they also have those models coming out, but they came along with this sort of safety guidance and protocol, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, so I will say also Sam admitted that the model picker that we bemoaned last week, he's like, we hate it too. We're going to try and I think the goal is with GPT-5 that they're kind of collapsing down to one general model that's going to be used for all things. But can you just run me through like what is the model spec? Like I know it's 6.7 times, but like what does it amount to? Like what is in this very large document that they're now putting out there?
So they basically put out a couple of like principles of how the models should work. And some of these principles are new or different compared to how models are working today. So, for instance, one of the principles is seek the truth together. And so the idea is that the model is not just there to people please and say that your
Roof.
thinking is great. It's there to challenge you and debate you as well and help you sort of uh, more thoughtfully think about a problem instead of just like spitting out a solution. I think that we saw sort of a very deep commitment to lack of censorship in this sort of protocol where they said there shouldn't be topics that are off limits or things that we overly index on what the answer should be. So, one example, I forget if it was ChatGPT or a different model that got slammed last summer when it was asked the ethical question of would you misgender somebody if it meant that you could, prevent a global act of terrorism.
It said no.
The model said, "No, don't ever misgender somebody." And the average human would probably not have the same response of like mass casualties is clearly something that you would want to avoid if you had the opportunity to avoid it. And so the models now are not they're more just like thoughtful and reasoning through those things like here's the arguments and here's what we think. And so there aren't as many just sort of off limits types of topics for the models compared to previous. And they have a few other, sort of tenets that they put out there, but those were the ones that really, I think were important for me.
Yeah, I thought it was really fascinating how they're dealing with the nuance of these things, like when people ask inappropriate questions, how do you and I think they were pretty transparent. Like, we're never gonna make everybody happy with these answers, but we think it's important that we have a set of principles that we stand by, that we're public about them, that they could be debated. And it's a it's a kind of hairy area to go out there and be public about how you're trying to deal with people who are feeding you misinformation or who are asking for inappropriate images or whatever, and how you're going to interact with that in different modes. So I thought it was pretty bold to actually get out there and make this public. And it's a really worthwhile public discussion to have.
I think so too. And they did sort of bounce the concept of having like a grown-up mode because the reality, if you look at use cases for ChatGPT, is there's a pretty significant volume of use cases for mature content. And so they put out there thinking about this is what a grown-up mode would look like. We don't want to generate bad content that's going to hurt people, the deep fakes and the, revenge, all that kind of stuff. But we can still engage with this type of material for a mature audience if they're asking questions or if that type of thing. And so just again, putting out there, thinking about it, knowing that to your point earlier, like it's out there, people are using it for this reason. And how do we think about that and think about how do we keep people safe and how do we develop our model in light of that. I think it's brave of them to take a stand. So
Absolutely. Well, anyway, we had a couple more stories on the list, but I think we're going to have to cut it off here because we're running out of time. I will keep them. There's so much fun stuff in the AI alignment space. We'll just have to roll it over and talk about them next week. But as always, this was great. I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
a lot of fun. Good to see you, Jeff.
We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Ready to expand your AI knowledge? Want to become the go-to AI expert in your organization? Take the next step with Upstart's AI certification for financial services. This comprehensive course simplifies the fundamentals of artificial intelligence for financial services professionals. Both the course and this podcast are brought to you by Upstart, whose leading AI lending marketplace connects millions of consumers to banks and credit unions that leverage Upstart's AI technology to deliver superior credit products, from personal loans to auto loans to home equity lines of credit. If you learned something useful this week, hit subscribe on YouTube or leave us a rating on iTunes or Spotify. Your support can help others discover What the AI. And finally, share your biggest AI questions and insights with us at email@whattheai.fm. We really do read every message, and we do our best to cover them all on the show.